Hi everybody, Terrible Dactyl here. Nope, this one. Welcome to Jurassic Plastic. Not many people have seen this Triceratops before. And I know that because anytime I post pictures on forums or on Discord or places like that, showing the original first run Generation 1 Carnegie Collection dinosaurs, a lot of people who are often new collectors, which is fine, I don't know why most people would know this, but they assume that these are knockoffs or Chinosaurs or something. But this is a legitimate Carnegie Collection dinosaur, and it's not only legitimate, it is the original. This is the OG Generation 1 Triceratops. And the guy I had out here before, now my sample is a little bit worse for the wear, you can see, but this is the later, probably 1993 or so, slightly retooled Triceratops, which obviously has a completely different paint scheme. Most people know about the repaints that happened in 2007, where a lot of the classic Carnegie models were updated with fresh paint. A lot of people will know about the repaints that took place in 1997, where the Carnegie line switched over to color vinyl instead of fully painted models over dark gray base vinyl. But not a lot of people know about the first round of repaints that took place between 1989 and 1990. That was when these original models were phased out and replaced with models that had more vibrant, more interesting color schemes. These duller colors, let's be real, this is a duller coloration than that black and greenish gray Triceratops, which I'm going to leave over here in the background just for comparison's sake. It's clearly not as interesting, right? But it's just different. I kind of like the simplicity of these old original Carnegies. There are hardly any markings on the head here. There's only a very little bit of contrast between the back and the underside. As far as I can tell, this is not even fully painted. Much like the late 90s models, this was cast in the base color vinyl and only painted on the areas that they wanted to highlight, like a slightly darker gray here on the back, this very, very light brown or beige on the head, some darker gray highlights on the epioccipitals here, and the tips of the horns, the base of the horns, the beak, the marking around the eye, and that bright orange eye that really lasted through the entirety of the line up until the 2007 repaints. There are no other highlights of color anywhere on this figure. There's nothing to color the nails. There's a little bit of that same dark gray on the mouth. But this model only uses a couple different colors. There's a white wash on the horns. There's the dark gray. There's the light gray. And there's the orange and black for the eye. And that's it. The rest of this is just the color of the vinyl. You can see here, it's got the original very crisp belly stamp that compared to this one, which is a little mold fatigued and has been changed quite a bit. You can see where the original was on the mold and then scraped out, and then the new one was stamped in. This one obviously is done in a more greenish gray color with a black back, sort of a blurry stripe here along the frill. Some earlier versions had a solid stripe, and of course black epiossifications. But it's charming, right? In my opinion, these old Carnegies, especially the originals, have their own kind of charm. I don't think they're the best models in the line necessarily, but you can get closer to the original sculpts. You can see the details on this are finer. They're not deeper, they're not better defined. If you compare the details to this, which had been retooled, according to sculptor Forrest Rogers, she actually didn't have anything to do with these retoolings and was a little bit miffed that they were just refreshing these old sculpts by going into the mold and just tooling the details even deeper rather than basically paying her to go back and redo the model like they started doing later on at the end of the 90s. But the details are not as deep, but they're more subtle. They're a little more aesthetically nice, I think. And the color pattern, obviously, is boring. Let's be real. They very quickly updated this. There are some early versions which date to either 1988 or 1989 that give it some big black dots in a ring around the frill. And then they start adding that darker color to the back. And that eventually evolved to the later Triceratops like this. But I really appreciate the life that Forrest Rogers breathed into these early Carnegies. They're not shrink wrapped to any stretch of the imagination. They're very well filled out. Even though the tail's a little skinnier than it probably should be here, you can see that it's sculpted in this sinuous little curve, and it's got a little bit of lumpiness to it. It's got a little bit of pudginess to it. It feels like a real animal. And if you look at things like the newer specimens of Psittacosaurus, that, you know, the one with the quills where you can see the outline of the body and maybe even the coloration, it emphasizes that dinosaurs like ceratopsians were a little bit on the pudgy side. They weren't shrink wrapped. They weren't these svelte, lean, running machines like they were all Cretaceous cheetahs. They had some heft to them. They had some bulk to them. They had some roundness to the limbs. And I like that about these original Carnegies. The pose is just striding forward peacefully, maybe as part of a herd, maybe just following along a trail of food somewhere. But it looks natural. They look very naturalistic. They don't look very monster-like at all. And just to give you a little bit of a walk around here, you can see that the head is just tilted ever so slightly to the right, while the tail kind of swings to the left. And the legs on the left are back. The legs on the right are forward, the way that a real quadrupedal animal would walk. It has some of these big feature scales. One thing I dislike about the way that some of these Carnegies are sculpted is that the feature scales feel a little randomly placed. I feel it would add some realism if they were more evenly distributed, or at least with some kind of a pattern to them. Triceratops in real life did have large feature scales like this, but I think they were more densely packed. Obviously, there's no way you could have known that in 1988, but there are details here, and they're really well sculpted, like the ear, the wrinkles around the eye, the striations on the beak. One interesting detail that I think is absent from this model is the little juggle boss here that should be poking out. I can't tell if this cheek-like thing is supposed to be that, just incorporated into the soft tissue of the cheek. I guess that could be, right? You can imagine it coming off the skull here and then just being covered in soft tissue. Anyway, I will be bringing you more videos showing some of the old Carnegie models, the original Carnegies, looking at the way that they evolved from their original incarnations to more recent incarnations, and then to repaints, and then to resculpts, and yada, 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 yada. If you are interested in that kind of thing, if you want to see some more walkarounds and reviews of these old Carnegies, Generation 1, Generation 2, and comparisons with the more modern ones, make sure you leave a comment, make sure you like this video, and make sure you hit subscribe so I can see you next time on Jurassic Plastic.